How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today I'm joined by a very special guest. He is the Senior Director of Sports Performance for USA Weightlifting. He's been actually involved in the sport of weightlifting since 1980, but he's also worked with the Chicago Bulls, and also being part of the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. Today I'm joined by the one and only Mike Gattone. How are you?
Good morning, Stephen. Thank you. I'm great. How about you, my friend?
I'm very well, thank you. A nice way
Good.
to round off my day today. Yeah, I suppose the first question is, how are you? What's kind of been happening in your world recently?
Yeah, recently, summer's ending and we are getting ready now, all ramped up for the World Championships. That's our senior team, our best and our brightest. It's going to be in Ningbo, China in October, late October, early November. And it's particularly big this year, Stephen, because it's the first qualifier for the Los Angeles Olympics. So all of the countries will come in, swinging and ready with their top athletes. So yeah, it's been a great summer, but we're ramping up now. Time to get rolling.
Yeah, yeah, nice. And with that, and you might find sometimes I throw a couple of tangents in there, but
No worries.
especially I love talking to coaches and athletes that end up competing around the world because there's lots of other variables that you need to think about. How well are they going to travel? How long do you get set up there? And especially for myself, having a background in team sports, how do you
Hmm.
find the travel and the prep, and how long do you kind of get there beforehand and kind of
Yeah.
settle in? How do you, especially from your experience, how do you find
Right.
kind of, one, getting yourself settled, but then also being able to prepare the athletes?
Yeah. Such a great question. It's funny because you and I were chatting a little bit about you living in Thailand now. So, we find, and physiology backs this up, even in American football, they say East Coast teams going west have more of a losing record than West Coast teams coming east. So, typically, when we go to Europe or maybe Central Asia and you're kind of it's a little easier transition. Going west, Thailand, China, Japan, always a different physiologic awakening, let's say, or adjustment. We'll try to get there a week to 10 days prior for each athlete. It's a 2 week competition. We don't want them coming, individually day by day, but we're trying to get travel groups together to get there about a week to 10 days. We travel, Steven, with like a lot of teams. We bring in a dietitian, we bring medical staff, both kind of internal medicine and then soft tissue type person,
Yeah.
physio, licensed massage therapist. We bring a sports psychologist or two with us. So we travel pretty heavy. You want to really try to be prepared for the rigors of travel. What can happen when you're away from home? Um, but yeah, it once you get there, once you settle in, then it becomes very much, it's like Groundhog Day. You wake up, you have a schedule every day. You go to training, you go to competition. With weightlifting, and I don't want to say it's that different than team sport, but obviously individual, and because we compete on the daily, right? So once it starts, like I said, really Groundhog Day because it's weigh in, feed the person, hydrate the person, then they compete, and then we get ready for the next person to do the next
Yeah.
same thing the next day. And in between, we're sneaking in training days, and it's pretty much you see the hotel, you see the venue, and you see the training hall.
Yeah.
So once you get going, they all kind of feel the same, honestly. But the rigors of travel, it's a serious thing, and for any athlete, and we're a weight sport. Um, so you take into that, hydration levels with flights, where we are, how different the food is, right? The kids on a cut, um, maybe we're in I don't know, a country where it's difficult to just get a plain chicken breast. The
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
food is saucy or spicy. All these kind of things come into play for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing about that, especially because for a competition like this, the World Championships, you said they're traveling over as a team, getting everything around there. Yes, it's an individual sport, but there's all those experts and coaches and everyone behind the scenes on that. And yeah, I can imagine once you are settled, like what you mentioned, and it's Groundhog Day. I suppose that's kind of a um I don't know if a comfort is the right word, but you kind of know what's happening,
There
and
is
that
comfort,
that that
yeah,
makes it a routine. Um,
for sure.
just backtracking a little bit, and we'll dive into a little bit more from then. I gave quite a brief introduction there, but obviously there's a lot more to your
Yeah,
career, if you like, than what I've mentioned. But for everyone listening who might not know your background, your kind of journey to the point that you got to now, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself, Mike.
sure, sure. I think I have a very crazy background. As we age, we start to think about our past, and I've been very blessed. I've been very lucky. I've um, just sort of somehow, when I was about 13, 14, fell in love with this Olympic movement for sure. Like I wasn't a kid who wanted to play professional football, or I liked, those sports, but for some reason, something to do with those five rings and that international flair really, really got me. And then very early, I fell in love with, let's say, heavy athletics. My real first love was the shot and the discus. Again, very obscure, right? Who the heck living on the south side of Chicago, kind of in an inner city-ish more area falls in love with something like that. But I did. And then because of that, the strength training part of it was really big. And then concurrently, I started getting my hands on old strength and health magazines, especially, and these pictures of these Soviet guys, David Rigert and Alexiev, and these guys just weightlifting and throwing heavy things sort of became my life and my identity very early, very early. And with that, as this obsession grew, it was learning the history of these things, but also like, how do you do it? I think right away became a coach in a sense because the knowledge of, like I said, the technique of the discus, or, you know, once I started seeing strength and health, then I started going to the library, into early parts of college and finding Soviet sports review and seeing, wow, Medvedev programs and all of these things, volume intensity. So that was my obsession real early. I just knew I was going to do something with the barbell. Initially, I thought I was going to be a throws coach, but 1985, as I was a college thrower, I also was lifting. I got invited to a camp at the Olympic Training Center. It was a U-23 camp for weightlifting, and then that was kind of it. I just threw myself in fully. I still love the throws. I love track. Everyone who knows me knows that. But I threw myself into weightlifting, hook, line, and sinker. I said, "This is what I'm going to do." Now, we're talking about early to mid '80s. So, what can you do to make a living? I didn't think that well about that part, but strength and conditioning was the way, or fitness. I worked a lot of jobs like that. I was an associate fitness director at a health club. It's where I met my wife. Um, but strength and conditioning was the avocation. And then hopefully, through that, you maybe, go to a club in the evening and train a weightlifter and train yourself, or you were with the barbell, you were teaching the things you knew, how to squat, how to snatch, how to clean. You learn how to manipulate volume and intensities and all this kind of thing. So that was my avocation, and then keeping my passion of weightlifting alive. Um, I got very lucky early too. Then in I won't get too deep down a rabbit hole here, but I got hired in 1990 to I was actually paid to be an Olympic weightlifting coach at a very crazy time. This is a time, Stephen, when you'd still go into health clubs, and we're coming out of the Nautilus age then. And there was signs, no chalk, no Olympic lifting, no dropping barbells. It was this for weightlifting, but I got hired by a not-for-profit in my state here, the state of Illinois, to teach weightlifting in a as a way to help underprivileged youngsters, and then bring some sports marketing to this city. It was called Peoria, Illinois. And so 3 years in a row, I ran national or international events there to bring some. Then I started build a little bit of a reputation as a competition director.
Yeah.
And I got hired in 1995 to run the 1996 Olympic game weightlifting event. So, um, again, kind of thrown into the business side of sport. Then I got onto the International Weightlifting Federation executive board, and went to worlds and junior worlds as part of that. So, kind of another little lesson in the sport. But during this time, building a reputation in strength and conditioning, when I was in Peoria, I was working with Bradley University basketball. And through that, I met and became friends with Coach Vermeil for the Bulls. So after the Olympics, I moved back to Chicago. And shortly after that, I started to work for Coach Al. I would say, that was a big turning point in my life. The job, yes, was cool, but really working for Coach Vermeil, I think he's probably the most well thought out strength and conditioning professional I ever met. The guy is just also obsessed with this field, constantly thinking, how to do things better, how to systematize things, and that matched so well with my mindset. So I really tried to spend a lot of time sitting at his feet and learning and absorbing his system. It was I consider it a benchmark in my career. um, and then, yeah, through that, I moved on from there. I went to work for the US Olympic Committee. I was in the coaching and sports science department. Opened my own strength and conditioning facility for a while here back in the Chicago area. I spent a little corporate time. I worked for the sports drink company Gatorade. But actually really a cool job too. I was sort of a what do I want to say? Somebody from the trenches working with the teams that signed. Yeah, they signed an agreement that they'll use Gatorade, but the company was smart and said, let's have somebody who understands and can work with the strength and conditioning staff on the
Yeah.
team or the sportsman team. So that was a cool experience. And then um, rehired by USA Weightlifting here in 2017 for the second go around. Um, in this role is it bears several names, I would say, because I wear several hats. I'm in charge of the sports department of USA Weightlifting, which sounds funny because you're like, it's a sports company, right? Or a sports national governing body. We're really a 501c company. But think about it. We have membership, we have events, we have marketing. So I'm in charge of the sports department. So all things when we put a team, youth, junior, senior on the field, how do we care for our athletes and support our athletes when we're not in competition mode? How do we find new athletes? How do we teach our coaches to be a little bit better through sports science and
Yeah.
biomechanics and these things? And this has really been, I think, kind of for me, a final peaking, I think, of all the things I've built and kind of dedicated myself to before this. That's why I know I'm very blessed and very lucky. It's hard to make a living in weightlifting. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been through that for 40 years, and I'm really blessed to be working for my passion. And yeah, every day I get to watch people lift barbells or think about people lifting barbells. And I still go in the evening, by the way, Stephen, when I check out of my 9 to 5 job, I go down the street to CrossFit gym, and I have a corner room there where I have 12 platforms of my own, and I still coach a bunch of
Oh,
kids
nice.
and adults too in the sport of weightlifting. So, that's an avocation that's never going to stop. When I stop working 9 to 5, and USA Weightlifting is not 9 to 5, but when I stop working 9 to 5, I'm still going to be coaching people, hopefully, good Lord willing, because I just love teaching people and thinking about that process. Okay, you want to snatch more, you want to clean and jerk more. How do we do this?
Yeah.
So
Oh, cool.
that's
And
my long story. I'm sorry to ramble a
yeah,
little bit
no,
there,
no,
but
it's from what you've said there, it's clear that it's even now it's still a passion. And I know for myself, I've been coaching, it'll be over 10 years now, maybe 10, 12 years. I've been coaching now, working with people in the gym. And I always say to people that, strength training in whatever shape or form you do it is for life. You still want to be doing it. And I
for
still want
sure,
to be
brother.
still want to be coaching it because yeah, I always describe it as you kind of get hit by that bug, and then all of a sudden it's like you want to learn more, you want to read more. And you mentioned there,
Right.
from reading things about the throwers and the weightlifting, your time at the Chicago Bulls, but looking at where you are now, with your, experience and knowledge, who would you say were your maybe biggest influences on your coaching or your coaching philosophy? And did has that changed over time?
Yeah. Number one, as I mentioned, Coach Ramil, how to think about training, how to prioritize what's important, how to think about it as a system. I think when you're a young coach, you can kind of chase shiny objects, can't you? Like you think like, oh man, I'm making this up, like uh, fascia training or stability training or power training, or like we go through these phases, and some of it, I'm not belittling that, because I think all of these type of things are learning. But at the end of the day, when you're going to be tasked with put a stress on an organism and make that organism progress, and that's what we do, um, how can you really think of that in enough of a specific way that you can get the right change for the person? So I think Coach Vermeil, for sure, number one up there. Two guys with USA Weightlifting in the 80s, well, I'd say 90s and 2000s. Lynn Jones, who's a UK gentleman also, who moved here from Australia and was our technical director when I was a young coach, like really took me under his wing, taught me a lot, how to coach, how to count to temps, just really how to live a life of weightlifting. I mean, Lynn lived and lives a life of weightlifting, and really, really taught me a lot. And then at the same time, our national coach, Dragomir Charoslan, at that time, a former Romanian Olympian, and taught me just a lot about passion and um, firing up people, how to throw your heart and soul into something, and also a lot about training, technique, writing, programming, this type of thing. So those guys were giant mentors. But I mean, we've all had so many, right? And I don't want to miss anybody.
Yeah,
Um, but those are three big professional guys that jump out at me for sure. If
yeah,
you're asking me about influences,
yeah. And I think with that
professionally.
because yeah, and especially the amount of time you've been involved in the sport, I think sometimes it's like where did you get who helped you out, because I think there's a knock-on effect from there where it's
Yeah,
passing on, whether it be programming like what you mentioned, that passion, when it comes to competitions or anything like that, there's always something that can be passed down. And I'm sure, like myself speaking to you now, you're then being an influence to other coaches that you're working with, and I find that an interesting question to ask. Um,
yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned at the start about coaching weightlifting, and it was you weren't allowed chalk, you weren't allowed anything from there. But you've mentioned about the systems that you would develop. How would you solve that problem to get people better at X or Y lift? And then you've mentioned, now, going to the Worlds, which is just around the corner, a sports psychologist, a nutritionist, a physical therapist, masseuse, this team of people to look after the athletes. Has How have you found the sport of weightlifting kind of progressed over
Mm.
time, in terms of the support around it, how athletes kind of carry themselves in prep for a competition, actually during the competition, and things outside of training? Or has there been a lot of things that have stayed the same? It's just pouring new things into this bucket, if you like, of weightlifting, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. The sport's been somewhat stable, right? Like, I mean, uh, probably like football, talking international football or things change as far as, let's say, rules, right? Like, but I think at the end of the day, if you're a basketball coach or an American football coach or an international football coach, the things that you can learn from somebody who was teaching or coaching in the maybe even 40s, 50s, 60s still can echo with you, right? Like there's some things like it's still a human being. We haven't really changed, evolutionarily. We haven't changed that way, um, dealing with the things humans deal with, and what do you do to make them better? Now, I would say the professionalism of weightlifting has changed over the years, only from the fact, Stephen, that, if you look at the 50s and 60s and 70s and even 80s, it's the Western world versus the Eastern world, which is the Soviet bloc, right? And their level of support, and I'll use the general term professionalism,
Yeah.
was off the chart, right? You take a kid from a youth, you identify what they're good at, you put them in a sports school, you surround them with every physiologic, mechanism possible. There's hundreds and hundreds of coaches across this vast area. They all share the same paradigm on how to teach a movement, whatever it is, pole vault to whatever, to snatch to hockey. This was a machine that, the Western world in many sports really had an extremely difficult time competing against, and weightlifting was one of them for sure. And then, I'll just say it here too. You add into that, like, sports medicine, when you're thinking about like organized, we've all seen Icarus. We've all heard
Yeah.
about these gigantic drug scandals. All of this was a part of this machine that, Western athletes from UK or United States or Canada or whatever were trying to compete against. Um, so I don't want to digress. You've asked me what's changed. I would say the field of play in weightlifting is leveling out quite a bit. Part of that is societal. Necessarily we don't have the giant governmental machines out there to the level we did during the Soviet days. Bulgaria, everybody. There's a few nations like, to me, China is definitely, it's a weightlifting machine. They've got this down better than anybody in the world almost. Um, how they identify kids and train them in a system and have hundreds of clubs to train at. But all of that said, maybe it's governmentally. There's other things that have happened in the United States for sure. The growth of, people say CrossFit for sure helped us. Let's say functional strength and conditioning, right? Like, we laughed when I was a kid, right? Like to do a snatch and a clean and jerk where I lived in Chicago, I had to go an hour to an hour and a half to this one scrubby but legendary gym where you could Olympic lift. Otherwise, like every gym, it was, like I said, machines, and weightlifting was not only out of vogue, it was dangerous and horrible. And um, to now, where, man, I mean, LA Fitness, Crunch Fitness, beautiful zillion-dollar clubs have platforms with bumper plates and chalk buckets. It's crazy. So we have more and more. This is the most members we've had in USA Weightlifting. Let's say, you know, certainly on average, probably in the last couple decades, more places to lift weights, more kids learning about it. And then we've tried to professionalize outside of, we can't build a system to compete against a nation that has, multiple national training centers and
Yeah.
identification of kids. But what can we do? We can pay our athletes more money, which seems like really funny, but we're a small 501c3, but we push really hard to give our top athletes a good monthly amount of athlete support funding. We give them what we call qualified performance expenses. So additional if they need to go to a physio where they live. Our athletes live all over the country. Some live at the Olympic Training Center, but most live with their personal coach, all over the country. If they want to pay for a meal service, if they, we fund these things. So level of professionalism, field of play, I would say that's been another thing. And I don't want to just sit here going like pointing a finger at performance enhancing supplements, because that goes across all sports. Weightlifting sadly got a very bad name for it. But look at what's happened in cycling and
Yeah.
track and field, and my God, distance running, EPO and things. If something helps an athlete gain an advantage, regardless of the sport, calming down their heart rate in archery, people have tried to cheat, right? But I would say that weightlifting was particularly harmed um, by doping, and I think part of that is because the sport is legendary, but it's not big enough to be untouchable, right?
Yeah.
Football internationally is untouchable. Cycling, track and field has more positives than weightlifting, but nobody in the IOC or in anywhere else is going to go drop track and field. Of course not.
Yeah.
But a little sport like weightlifting could become a sacrificial lamb. Like, look, we're trying to clean this thing up. So I'm diatribing a little bit, but getting to the point that bringing in a third party organization, the International Testing Association, um, mandating out of competition testing for all countries across the world, all of these things. So economics, um, socio thing, sociological fitness trends like the adoption of functional training, um, leveling of playing field, dropping of, breakup of the Soviet Union. All of these things have been big changes. You still have to train an athlete the same. The snatch and clean and jerk remain the same, but how we all do weightlifting now, we can we can specialize or personalize to what our nation looks like. And here, um, it's been golden days.
Yeah.
We've done the best we've done in years. Um, the rise of women, I think, has been a giant, boon for USA weightlifting. We're a nation of very strong women, and I love it. And all of these things have just helped us with the growth and I would say change in the sport. When you go to Worlds, you're still seeing, um, powerhouse countries doing things they probably did in the 60s. I don't think, Stephen, that training, we're a we're a bilateral squat, bilateral hip hinge, bilateral press sport, right? Like that's the same. We're explosive. So people still squat, people still pull. Of course, they do snatch and clean and jerks. Um, but the psychosocial changes I think have been probably the greatest thing. This was a real Eastern Bloc, lift weights and then go smoke and drink vodka sport. You know what I mean? Now
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
very much, I think, this, just for me, it's a model of what's is really beautiful in sport. We have people of all different sizes. We have men and women. You know, most countries, like it's really hard to say that, China is a dominant nation, but there's medals. Thailand has some really amazing medal winners. United States, like we're a very diverse sport too. Like so. Um, I would say things have stayed the same in a way, but it's that change on the makeup of the sport that have been the greatest
yeah.
things. So.
I'm I'm glad you kind of explained it that way because you know I've spoken with other coaches, trainers, athletes, and there's only so there's plenty of books out there. There's only so many ways you can do a certain thing because ultimately, everybody has to use a barbell, everyone has to use plates, and there's only a
Right.
certain way of being able to do that lift. Yes, and we'll dive into this a little bit more, but ultimately, everyone's using the same equipment.
100%.
Like what you've said there, that level of professionalism, there's, like what you said about, looking after athletes if they're getting a meal prep, if they need a massage, whereas before, you hear stories of athletes having to fund it, themselves or the struggling paying for, their own transport or anything like that. Whereas, again, always we're kind of referring back and that's why I asked that question at the start about, going to the World Championships. Everything is kind of taken care of. How can we put them into the best possible place? Whereas, yes, in the Soviet Union and those sorts of things, they might have been doing that already. China might be still doing that, but at least it's an opportunity for everybody to be able to do that. And like what you mentioned, the US challenging, winning medals is great to see. And I suppose we might even touch on the the programming side of things because like what you were saying before about how can we develop better systems, better programs. Is there a better way of doing this? Or what I like to think about is what happens if we give this a go? What happens if we
Hmm.
change this? Because I think sometimes that phrase of if it isn't broken, don't try and fix it. But sometimes it's just a case of, well, what does happen if we change this and it works and your athletes progress. And I
That's
suppose
right.
from the strength conditioning, team environments that you've worked in, with the weightlifting side of things, and ultimately having and creating success for that athlete that's in front of you. What have you found to be that recipe for success? Is it
Mm.
getting them to stick to the program? Is it the environment? Is it building relationships with them so you know how to get the most out of them? What have you found to be from your experience that recipe for success? On the platform, getting them lifting more weight in the gym. What's
Hmm.
kind of been what would be your answer to that? What's the secret
Yeah,
sauce?
that's great. It's a great question. I mean, ultimately, there's an intrinsic spark. It's one of those things. It's hard to. I visualize it as like maybe a little light, a little button, something inside a person that makes them go, you know what? It's 3 o'clock. I just got out of school. My friends are gonna go play video games, but I'm gonna have my mom or dad drive me to this dusty gym. It's not a school sport. There's no cheerleaders there, but I'm gonna go there because I'm just obsessed with this thing and I want to do it. Um, and I think any coach in the world, you know, I hope would be open-minded enough to admit that. Like you need to find the special individual. right? Like we've all seen people who come in that can jump out of, I'm thinking of motor or physiologic things you'd look for in a weightlifter, right? Like they're really mobile. Oh my gosh, they overhead squat their butt to the platform with a nice neutral spine. The first time I tested them, they could vertical jump out of the house, they're mesomorphic. Just without training, they've got nice muscle mass. They don't want to do it. So what are you going to do? Like you can plead, you can cajole, but at the end of the day, probably like anything else, a dad or mom who don't want their kid to go the wrong way with on the streets or something, like ultimately human beings make their own decisions. So first thing I would say, like, be mindful enough to know when you've got that person, and try to feed that person what they need. Um, that would be number one. Yes, I'll use the term love, care, compassion, um, passion with compassion. Those are the things that I think make somebody like um, can make the person who's a little on the edge go harder, stay more. Um, those things are really, really important, um, because this sport, but I think every sport, it's a time game, man. It's a time game. Like um, you got to go at it for a while, and it's a battle while you're going at it. Like you hit sometimes plateaus where you stop improving. Sometimes you hit times where, God dang it, I can't snatch 100 kilos, and I was snatching 110.
Yeah.
All of these things are part of this journey. So I really think the longer I do this, that intrinsic or psychological, psychosocial aspect is probably number one. Like,
Yeah.
because this is an unusual, bizarre thing, it just really is. Find a 16-year-old kid who's like, oh, I want to clean and jerk more, like
Yeah.
it's different, it's unusual.
Yeah.
That would be the number one thing. And then when you have that kid, that person, um, and then they've got the physiologic to go along with it, okay, look out. Now you've really got something. And like I mentioned, some of the things in my sport, it's neuromuscular, right? Like so, rate of force development, really important. Are they explosive? Mobility, also a really important thing. The Soviets used to call this gymnastics with a barbell. It's
Yeah.
not just a strongman, like, rip it up in any way, as seeing it, requires mobility in the ankle and I'll say the hip. We know that's a very general term, but the hips, you know, being able to differentiate extension in your thoracic spine without hyperextending your low back, good shoulder strength. All these things are important. Man, I've had kids that are fired up. They're amazing kids, and for some reason they can't lock their elbow out. There's something in their anatomy, and man, we're doing pec minor, we're doing every damn thing we can, and that elbow won't lock out. Well, God bless that person, but like that's really hard to be in an overhead sport
Yeah.
where you got to
Yeah.
hold the weight. So the physical next. And then, it goes right along with it, I think, and maybe I touched on it in the beginning, but the ability to have folks around you, especially at a young age, that'll feed this, right? Like, um, will you drive your kid to a weightlifting gym or to a football pitch or somewhere else on a regular daily? Can you? Maybe you're two parents and like, you know what, kid, we have to work to feed you
Yeah.
guys during that time. So um it's very complex, but those are the things, especially in a Western system like this. Now look, and again, there's places where if you look and identify early, they go, okay, you're going to go to the sports school. And then many of those things are taken care of. But here, you need that kind of triangle, let's say, of variables to really make it work well.
Yeah. And with that, there's kind of like two things that was going through my mind there. And I 100% understand that, what actually came to mind when you were mentioning there about, both parents working, trying to take the kid. I was quite lucky, I played rugby and wanted to pursue that. I think everybody, or a lot of my mates who I played with were like, yeah, we're going to be professional rugby players. And you try and do that.
Of
Obviously,
course, yeah.
it doesn't always pan out like that. But, I was lucky that my parents took me there. Whereas I always remember British rowing were historically in kind of um, just the posher schools,
Exactly. Yeah.
well-to-do
Yeah,
areas. And I always
absolutely.
remember that the area that I grew up in the UK, British rowing actually came to my school and was just like, look, let's have tryouts, let's see how you get on. And actually, a couple of my mates who hadn't really done rowing, a lot of, actually progressed and went through
Hmm.
the selection
I
side of
found
things.
some
And
good boys. Yeah.
sometimes it's kind of like you can find diamonds in the rough, if you like, who can take to sports like this. And that kind of brings the next two questions off from kind of an athlete or a lifter starting out compared to what we're talking about with the Olympic cycle and
Mhm.
world championships. How much kind of, when we're talking about time, is it a case of, if you've got someone who's really mobile and you just think, when you're talking about their, gymnastics with a barbell, actually, we just need to get this person stronger, and kind of like, when people are already good at one thing, they just want to
Mhm.
pursue that one thing. It's like, oh, I'm really mobile. Well, actually, if we just spend a little bit of time on your weakness, we
Mhm.
could you could go from, snatching this to this, and then you could go from this competition to this competition. How do you kind of approach that with people just entering the sport? And then on the other side of the spectrum, you mentioned there about, you might plateau, there's, peaks and troughs. And the
Mhm.
athletes that you said right at the start, those rings, that Olympic dream, which you hear people get caught up on it, and that's something that they're chasing. But obviously, it's a 4-year cycle. How do you
Yeah.
manage somebody over that 4-year cycle?
Mhm.
If you've kind of you know what they can do, but within 4 years it can be up and down,
Yeah.
injuries, and with the goal of still the Olympics. But it's 4 years at the elite level compared to this
Yeah.
person that's a beginner, and you need to try and get buy-in to kind of work on those weaknesses. I know I kind of said a lot of stuff there. I
No,
threw a
that's
lot of stuff
okay.
in.
Those are great questions.
Yeah.
Let's start with the time situation. So you asked me in the previous question, kind of like this combination of what we'd be looking for, and again, this is like a puzzle, but the I will say the Abraham Maslow is Maslow. I always get this wrong. Like the hierarchy of needs. This is really big, right? Because as a human being, especially let's say, so we have uh, statistically Olympic medalists in weightlifting are around 25 to 27 years old, right? And statistically, probably 4 years out, we can start to say who the Olympians are. Like it's very difficult to have someone appear and make an Olympics in 2 years in the sport of weightlifting, probably in a lot of sports. So at least 4 years out, we're starting to say like Steven looks like he can be one of our folks going to Los Angeles, let's say. Okay. Um, there's other things, really showing like 8 or 10 years, like how good a kid is. But let's just start there for a minute. So 25 to 26, take 4 years out. What was happening to you at that time of your life? You're graduating from high school. Your mom and dad are asking you, what are you going to do for a living? You may be, you know, thinking about finding a partner for life. Maybe you're in love. Maybe you want to be in love. You need money because pretty soon your parents are going to be like, you know what, kid, love you, but you got to go make a life for yourself. So this hierarchy of needs becomes a really big part of the program. This is why, again, the Eastern Bloc folks knocked that off by saying, okay, we'll take care of all that stuff for you. We haven't been able to do that. We're not able to do that in weightlifting. In the United States, there's other Olympic sports that do take care of that. You can go to the university for swimming or for athletics or basketball, all big Olympic sports, but not weightlifting. Not at this point. It's not an NCAA sport. So that's a big part of the game, bro. Like, if you're seeing that 18, 19-year-old or 18-year-old, let's say senior in high school, and they're starting to talk about, I want to go to university to study, you know, pre-med or something or whatever it is, and you start to go, okay, this is great, but it's a choice that may affect you strongly potentially over the next 4 years. So that's one thing. What can we do to mitigate that? We're trying our best, to up our game on athlete support that I mentioned, and that's financial. But it's not just throw money at somebody, right? It's like be a part of, we call it the national team program. So, yeah, we're potentially, if you're good enough, like I'd love this to go down even further to the 18, 19 year olds, but that's budgetary. But hopefully we're trying to support them enough where they feel like I'm part of something. I have some resources, I'm required to post training videos. I'm getting input from a biomechanist. I'm coming to camp at the Olympic Training Center. Um I'm I'm being sponsored to travel to the world championships. So these things are part of, can you make somebody feel supported? Because time is the deal, bro. Like time is the deal. So I would say that's when you're talking about that need, right? I think that's kind of where we started this. Like we need time, putting in the work, being in the system, making the movements, and the adoption of I'm a weightlifter now a part of this, right? In the United States, we have, and again, I'm talking high performance now because there's a lot of wonderful people, adults doing weightlifting now. And I'm talking about like folks trying to go to world championships and things like that. We've sort of had two tracks that we've had good success on. One has been these kids, just like other countries that have started at, 10, 12, 13. Think Olivia Reeves, our last two Olympic medalists, Olivia Reeves and Hampton Morris. They started very young. They have very supportive parents. They, like all of these, Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of needs taken care of, very, very, very perfect storm, plus the kid had the physiology and the psychology to do it. You know, we had Harrison Morris, CJ Cummings. These guys started at a very young age, came through the system, had tremendous physiology and psychology, made it. Then we've had luck here. We're big, I mean, lots and lots and lots of people and fairly strong and healthy country, right? So we have athletes do tremendous things on the strength and power side for other sports, American football, throws, even an athlete I coached, Tara Knott. She won the gold medal in Sydney 2000. She was a collegiate soccer player. So we'll call it the transition athlete
Yeah.
route. In Paris, we had Wes Kitts, who played college football. We had Mary Tyson Lappin, who was a college thrower. So that's the secondary route. Um, we have a giant guy, Colby Ferguson. If you haven't seen the Instagram of him front squatting 300, go look for it, buddy.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and that's kgs for my American friends. You know what I'm talking about. But, I mean, unbelievable. He stands up so fast, he actually takes a step forward. So, that man was an American football player as well. So those folks we're still seeing, like from the day someone teaches them the snatch and clean and jerk till they go to their first competition to where they're making international teams, it's about 2 years. So you still need some time. Like I have not seen yet, and somebody will probably remind me if I forgot somebody. But the strongest, craziest American football player or thrower, I still haven't seen them yet. Like just walk into a weightlifting competition and make a world championship team. So minimally, we gotta have a couple of years, right, to teach the nuances. And I think you from rugby or you know football. I'm trying to think, or maybe basketball's not quite that. Well, basketball is that, like you tested a kid and man, they had the gigantic wingspan. They jumped out of the gym. They did a 5-10-5, whatever else, their hand-eye coordination stuff was off the charts. They didn't know how to play the freaking game. I don't know what it is, right? But or like I know in American football, I've seen this a lot on, an offensive lineman who's just RoboCop, right? Like 6'8", built like a Greek god. They can clean, they can squat, they can sprint, and then you have that, grizzled old veteran who can hardly squat anymore because their knees are blown up. But damn it, that's the guy you want protecting the quarterback's back, because they know the game better somehow, or they have this guttural feeling. So you need time, bro. Like you need time learning the barbell, understanding the movement. And so that's an important combination. Comes back to this question. In general, I'm telling people, like, you gotta understand and respect this. It's going to take a little bit of time of keeping your head down and dedicating yourself to learning how to do this, plus the potential stuff that I may send somebody to you for, like, hey Steven, this kid's lacking something in their squat pattern. What is it? Ankle mobility, or you know, is there something going on in the hip? Layer that stuff on too, right? Because you would like those ideals. They're not, but you would like to try to have those ideally when you're gonna ask somebody to rip something off the floor and go under it in a second plus, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
or a
And
second minus, I should say. So.
yeah. And a last thing that you said there was, have respect for the sport. It's, you hear people about people coming from other sports. I know, the Emily Campbell was a
Mhm.
woman I
Yeah.
went to university with.
You
Um,
did.
yeah,
She's the
yeah.
best. I love her.
And I love
Do you know
watching her
Stuart
lift.
Martin, by the way? Do you know Stu Martin from
I
British
was lucky
Land?
enough to have Stuart
Okay.
on the podcast. Yeah.
Oh, tell him he's okay. You did, or you're gonna have him on?
I know I've had him. I've had him
Oh,
on the
okay,
podcast,
okay,
and Emily as well. And
okay,
she started off as a hammer thrower, and then
okay.
then
Yeah,
gravitated towards weightlifting. I
yeah,
can't remember whether she was still at university then, or whether she'd left and or gone
yeah,
back. But you hear about that, and again, when you say it takes time, it's been, yes, all right. The last couple of years she's had success, but it's taken time to refine and get better at that. And I think that's the thing that often people forget, especially that with weightlifting, as it's quite technical. It's going to be a lot more
that's technical.
complex than a squat. And is that where you well, yeah, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts, where you agree that strength is a skill that needs like learning and refining, and
Mm,
constant kind of doing the basics time after time and repetitions. Because you hear about, I don't know, I literally spoke about this last week, I think, about oh, that was it, the film Bohemian Rhapsody. I ended up watching, I just caught the last little bit of that. And Brian May, as a guitarist, you think, well, he practiced time and time and time again to get where it
yeah,
was. And I can imagine he's
that's right.
still, practicing now. And it's kind of, you think of the amount of time that he's been doing that. Think about
Yes,
the amount of time that people have been doing, weightlifting, strength training, to know,
yeah,
what feels good, how to get that groove, how to get that rhythm with a lift. Would you kind of agree with that?
100%, coach. Like we get to talk for 2 hours. First of all, because you mentioned Brian May. Like I love watching things about artists and musicians and chefs because it's just like what we do, man. You got to be obsessed. You got to that stuff is just in their gut, when they
Yeah.
start doing things. I read where Brian May made his first guitar like with scrap and stuff. That's why
Yeah, I
his
heard that
sound
as
was
well.
so.
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't that cool? So obsessed as a kid,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, like I worked for 8 years. We had Piros Dimas here working with us, and this is a man who started weightlifting at 7 years old.
Mm.
So like he the number of repetitions and the feeling in his mind of turning a bar over. I don't care how strong somebody is, like that's insanely different. And I'll say like a kid who comes, and I keep saying kid, I'm sorry. I don't mean that disrespectfully. I think of myself as a kind of old grandpa now, a person who comes into the sport, let's say Emily, who I love, or, now Mary Tyson Lappin, they're similar. They both came from throwing. They might have power snatched or power cleaned. They certainly squatted as part of their sport, but it wasn't their sport. At the end of the day, spinning in the ring and doing that thing was their sport. And so that's where they put the bulk of their time. You know, I'll tell you right now, I don't mind saying this. I won't say it, but we have this transition program, and I recently spoke with a young woman who I saw on Instagram, a thrower, 130 kilo double power clean from hang. So I'm like, okay, this is big, and it was nice. It wasn't a big starfish. It was rack things you would want to see, right?
Yeah.
And she's at the Olympic Training Center right now for a week or so training. And yesterday, my coach there sent me a video of her power snatching, and it's the first time she's power snatched. She's post college. She's cleaned 130 double. She's done a little bit of hang snatch, but first time putting a bar on the floor and power snatching. So care how strong you are, man. Like, or how explosive you are. We have to have some time to learn that now.
Yeah.
Like um it's just like that football analogy I said, like having a guy who's the strongest person on their street, but then, putting their hand in the dirt, responding to somebody trying to bull rush them and sack your quarterback. Not to mention this part of it. Like I'll say in weightlifting, and again, I don't want to be that guy in my sport because I know every sport. I don't know how a rugby player, like when you're about to freaking be hammered, like, right? You're probably, I always wonder, we'll have to have a beer sometime, but like is there a lot of like when someone's hitting you, is there a lot of like F bombs flying around and stuff like that? Or is it just
Yeah,
part
there's
of the game?
definitely. So I played in the I played in the scrum. So the standing joke is that the scrum like I'm not going to say it's the exact same like American football as a scrimmage, but you'd be down and in there,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
the a few choice words will be chosen, and if anything
Sure.
happens, then it's look, let's try and get a little bit of a lineup on there. I remember when I played rugby in Australia for a little bit, and especially some of the when we're talking about genetics, how people are built. I think the South Sea Islanders, Fijians, Tongans, they're built for
Monsters,
rugby.
yeah.
They are
Yeah.
just powerful,
Yeah.
powerful men, and I
Yeah.
still maintain that some of the biggest tackles I've ever had when I've played rugby, because the amount of force and how much they just throw themselves
Sure, of
throw
course.
themselves into it. And what was funny is then I would try equally as hard to put as much power in, and it would only fire them up more,
Yeah.
because I generally think that I watch a lot of rugby anyway, but when the South Sea Islanders kind of get going, and even New Zealand with like the Maori players, as athletes, you just think, yeah, it's crazy. I mean, again, you're
Yeah.
talking. This might be a little bit. Well, this is a big tangent, but when we're talking about power output and speed, when you
Mhm.
think about Jonah Lumu, I know obviously he's sadly passed away now, but when he burst onto the scene in the 90s, he was a winger. I think it was 11 seconds 11 seconds at the time. You could run 100 meters, but you was 6 foot
Wow.
odd, 100
Yeah.
kilos as a winger, whereas in the past it was always smaller,
Mm,
slighter build wingers
mm,
who were supposed to be fast. And then all of a sudden this guy comes along that breaks the
mm,
mold. And now
mm.
you see, people trying to get the bigger, more powerful people. How can we make them faster? Could there be a winger? Could there be a center? And then all of a
Mm.
sudden, it just changes the game a little bit. So,
That's
like what
right.
you're saying
Yeah.
there about American
Yeah.
footballers coming over
Yeah.
to weightlifting, they
That's
have
right.
the strength there, but yeah, I think it is a case of even though these bigger guys were changing position in rugby, they still need to learn how to pass a ball off both hands.
That's right.
Still need to know how to
Yes.
read a game,
Yeah.
how to do defense, and yeah, I thought that was I thought that was interesting what you mentioned there, and in
There's a I call it putting the knife in. It's probably not it's because this is a little it's nice and I'll go watch an Instagram about baby donkeys when we're done talking. But when you're in the weight room, like to turn over a heavy snatch or a clean jerk, there's this putting the knife in, right? So your average strength and conditioning person, like they don't need to have that commitment. Like, okay, if I could power clean 180, that's amazing, right? I'm a footballer and I power clean 180. I want to see that guy probably. But like, okay, they missed, no biggie. Everyone's like, okay, 180 is your max. There's this at the power position, at the explosion. This is where, if you look biomechanically, that this big impulse happens, right? Like this max force production in about zero point 0.2 seconds. Like that's an amazing. That's where physiologic magic takes happen. But Stephen, that's where this takes place, and that's where the time is important because I'll see a lifter. I call it rip and pray. That just like, oh, okay, swing and a miss. Versus this, no mother, like you're going in. They stab the knife, like they own that shit. And this is what takes time to develop. And some people maybe never will develop it. But um, Lu Xiaojun, I remember a couple of years ago coming up to Paris. We were at the Worlds in remember I was trying to tell you I couldn't remember the other city, and it was in Thailand. It wasn't Phuket. All these things mashed together with me. Another nice
yeah,
beach town, but I mean the man was laying in the warm-up room on his stomach with ice on his low back, like between the snatch and the clean and jerk. And then this guy comes out and wins the thing, like. And I heard him on an interview where he said, I've been lifting so long now that like for him at that point, he's like, if I know my squat and my the Chinese do a lot of kind of like the heavy deadlifts. It's a very specific deadlift. It looks like a snatch or a clean and jerk, but it's you don't have the speed or the force. He goes, if those are heavy, I know I can snatch or clean and jerk it. Now that wouldn't inversely, if you took a big power lifter, they don't know how to stab that knife. But that guy has stabbed that knife so many times. He's like, if I keep my strength up, I'll put myself under the goddamn bar. Or
yeah.
if you look at Demos, if you watch the video of him from the Athens Olympics, that was his fourth Olympics. He was beat to smack, his knee, his wrist. Um, but he had been lifting since he was 7, and he could there's of course it's a toughness and everything, but he had that motor ability to put that knife into like when he had to commit to the weight. And I'm not I know I'm being a little ethereal or artistic in that description, but that's the time thing. That's where we have to teach somebody to apply the strength they have, and it's a meshing of guts for sure, and ferocity, and then just feel of I've produced this giant force, but I've directed it correctly. Um, and that's a long discussion, but I've said this to my biomechanist and my exercise or excuse me, my sports psychologist at the same time. Do we miss because of biomechanics, or do we miss because of psychology? And what's the connection? Because I once saw a guy try to snatch 180 kilos at a training camp. It was 3 attempts, and each attempt was a miss. But each attempt, the bar velocity went up. So,
Right.
like, we were measuring bar velocity at the time. So it's not just this ability to produce force, but put it in the right direction. Probably like throwing a discus or tackling somebody, right? Somebody hits a glancing blow. Maybe they were moving super fast, but like, they didn't quite direct the force through the dude's midsection. So, you know, I think I digressed a bit, but that's why it takes some time. Piros called it dancing with the barbell, but it takes some time to learn how to dance with the barbell. So I think that's what I would say to somebody. Like, if you're coming into this, even if you're an adult, and what I mean by that is you're doing it, it's going to be a fun recreation. You want to go to some local weightlifting meets and stuff. Um, Understand that's going to take a little while to learn how to do it efficiently and correctly, and then you have to connect it with a little bit of guts, a little bit of no fear. When we look at our biomechanics, it's interesting, Steven. Sometime we'll have to talk about that. But if you see the force of the barbell on a catch, it's much greater than the force of the barbell when we punch against the floor. It makes sense. But, think about somebody that's cleaning 200 kilos. Well, I mean, they're accepting 400, or
Yeah.
creating 400 or 450, you know, pounds of force to slow that thing down. Like, you're now going to pitch this sucker and have to control it. So there's some guts involved in this as well. So
It's been quite interesting. Usually the last question that we asked would be kind of like some words of wisdom at the end, but I think we've kind of, filtered down from, quite a broad topic
yeah.
all the way down that, yes, things have maybe progressed in some areas in terms of, nutrition, recovery, all
Mm-hmm.
those sorts of things, and having that level playing field that we spoke about. But ultimately, the programming, the skill is still the same. But it just comes down to how much time are you going to put in there? How much of,
That's right, brother.
sticking that knife in are you gonna do from there? I say it to, having coached, power lifters, it's a case of, at some point you need to, have a little bit of, I can't think of a better word of aggression, but it's like, no, look, I'm gonna own this weight. I'm gonna go into it. I know,
Yes.
me competing myself, it's I completely understand. And when you kind of in that, yeah, call it the zone if you like, it's kind of, all of a sudden you get that momentum going. Thanks a lot, Mike, for taking the time to
You're
jump on
welcome,
today. I,
Steven.
I think we could have gone through on lots more tangents and a lot
I
more
love
things that
this.
have
This
gone
was
there.
great.
But
I appreciate it.
yeah, some really really useful information content in there. But if anyone has any questions about what we've spoken about today, want to reach out to you, questions about weightlifting, getting involved in weightlifting, or anything like that,
Yeah.
where could people find you or reach out to you, Mike?
Yeah. Easy place. You could email me. It's Mike dot, and my last name is GATTTTONE. So Mike.Gattone at usaweightlifting.org. I'm an old man who likes the social media, so you can find me on Instagram, and that's a good place if you want to DM me on that. It's mgatone64. Here I was born, old man. So those are two places. And yeah, if you want to talk about weightlifting, I love it. This was awesome, man. I really had a great time. I appreciate you asking me to be on. This was wonderful.
No problem at all. Glad you enjoyed it. And like I say, yeah, lots and lots of useful things in there. But thanks a lot, Mike, for taking the time to
Thanks,
jump
brother.
on. Thanks a lot
You're
to
welcome.
everyone listening, and I will catch you all at the next episode.